My name is Christina Newhouse. I'm with Carolina Land and Lakes. We are a nonprofit located in the foothills of North Carolina. But we do a lot of our work in western North Carolina and actually all the way up into Rowan County, depending on what the work is and what the grant is. So, real briefly, in the back of the room, there are some maps on the table of one of the fire districts that we're going to be talking about here today, and it's the Rosman Fire District. And so if you want to go ahead and look at that or look at some of the community wildfire protection plans that are on that table and have any questions for me afterwards, that would be great, but just to let you know there's some visuals back there. So today we've got Jonathan McCall with Wildlife Resource Commission with us. Jason Noble was going to join me for the talk today from the North Carolina Forest Service. However, he was dispatched on a fire earlier this week, and so Jonathan stepped up, who is also a partner within updating these community wildfire protection plans. So thanks a lot, Jonathan, for stepping in. I appreciate it. So I don't have a whole lot of slides, so I'm going to do some more of the talking. So what have we learned, and what is the importance of partner collaboration? Well, what I've learned is that these wildfire protection plans are actually needed, and there is a real good use of grant dollars, federal money, going towards updating these plans, especially on a fire district level. So in North Carolina, and they're done differently in every state, and sometimes they're done differently on a jurisdictional level, but in North Carolina, they are done on a fire district level. So a little background, we are updating wildfire protection plans in 27 counties, including the eastern band of Cherokee Indians, the Koala Boundary. And one of the things that I found out recently is in the counties that we've completed thus far, so Transylvania, and a couple in Buncombe, and Yancey, and Avery, and in Burke County, there are 237 areas of which are under concern. So these are communities at risk that have been identified to date. So if we're doing this on a landscape scale, and we have 27 counties to do, and we've only done really 5, it just shows you how many more communities are really at risk. And there's all kinds of reasons why these communities are at risk. Anywhere from topography to the way the structures are built, to lack of water, to no defensible space, to adjacency to wildlands, fire occurrence. There's all these different factors which determine that, but the North Carolina Forest Service and the fire departments themselves are really the ones that help identify each one of these areas of concern. So I'll give you some key elements real quick. So how many people in this room have never heard of a community wildfire protection plan before? Okay, there's a few. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time drilling down what a wildfire protection plan is. But do some brief overviews. So you've got several different purposes. One is collaborative planning, risk identification, mitigation prioritization, emergency preparedness. These 4 elements you will find within the beginnings of the plan, and collaborative planning is a key factor to that, right? So the first thing that we've had to kind of figure out is, how do you approach a fire district that has never or doesn't remember ever having their community wildfire protection plan done, right? So it's almost sometimes a cold call, right? And you have to get them to initially trust you right off the bat, to have them invite you into their space. And it's not just their space, it's their community. It's to talk about their residents and what their resources are, and to be really honest about what their resources are, how they're prepared, what they're not prepared in, what they consider to be vulnerable. And I find that that trust, that level of trust, and that willing to commit to actually updating these plans, and the willingness to do so is something that we should all be really proud of these guys, because it's all their volunteer time to begin with. And so they're devoting even more time to actually trying to make sure that their communities are safe. And then asking all of our partners to participate. So, and I think this goes back to the FLN and the idea of being part of the fire family, is that we have cultivated these relationships with these other landowners, being state parks, Wildlife Resource Commission, North Carolina Forest Service lands, reaching out to land conservancies over the course of the last 10 years, that when we ask them to participate in this process, that they trust us that we're going to be representing them in a good way, and that we really look forward to working with them in their collaboration. And that has been built up over a long period of time. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done doing that over the years, and I appreciate the FLN and everybody else for helping us. So we look at some other key factors like risk identification, focusing on specific wildfire hazards and vulnerabilities within their communities, and then we prioritize some of these mitigation efforts. Some other key parts are focusing on the mitigation efforts, balancing the risk assessment, and protecting these critical areas. What we're looking at, are we going to be looking at putting in fire lines? Are we going to be looking at creating defensible space? Are we going to be looking at opening roads? All different other factors. And then integrating short and long-term action strategies. What are immediate things that people can do to help reduce their wildfire risk on a residential level? Because at the end of the day, when we're talking about housing, we're talking about structures, it really falls on the homeowner to do all that they can do to help reduce their risk. And so how can they do that in a cost-effective manner that's going to get the most amount of traction, and also going to help save lives, not just their life, but firefighters' lives, so that they're not standing there trying to protect structures that aren't worth protecting. And so, so this is the Rosman Fire District in Transylvania County. So I chose this fire district because of where it is in relation to South Carolina. So right over that green line that you see up there is also the state and the county line. And a lot of the terrain is very similar to what you guys have up in this area in Pickens. What you see in the green is actually the fire district line, and what you see in the middle is, in the pink, are what we call the communities at risk. So it's really interesting to see that up in the top part is all U.S. Forest Service property, and to the left, or the right, it's to the right, right? To the right is state parks, and below that is Wildlife Resource Commission property, which you see in blue. You can also see from this vegetation layer how covered in wilderness it really is. And where these communities lie. To the left is all Headwaters State Park, North Carolina Forest Service property. So within all of these wildlands are all these structures that are, peppered in, all in between there. And what the fire department and the collaborating partners looked at, the communities that they thought were most at risk really weren't adjacent to U.S. Forest Service property. They were more adjacent to North Carolina Forest Service and state parks. And I think that has a lot to do with terrain. But you've got this mitigation map. And so working with all of the collaborators, what we looked at is where the structures actually lie within the areas of concern, and what are the different mitigation projects that can be done. We also inventoried what was already being done. So where all the burn units were for state parks and how they were laid out, what they were named. Same thing with Wildlife Resource Commission, including where their fire breaks are already located. Same thing with Headwaters. We also found in certain areas that there were old logging roads and trails that can be identified and used in the event of a wildfire, but also which tied into communities like on the bottom one, Round Mountain, which if they were open and available would be of use in the event of a wildfire to help defend those structures. And then we also look at different types of programs that are available through the information that we get from our partners on how people can apply for funding to get some of this this work done. And then at the top over at U.S. Forest Service property, you can see the burn units that are in place, their prescribed burn units that have been identified, as well as all the Conserving Carolina property that is located within this fire district and adjacent to. And so we were having a very interesting conversation at lunch in the back about the Conserving Carolina easements that are in place, as well as other properties and where they laid within this fire district and what their risk was, and what type of funding that they could apply for. So just being able to visually see where these larger land holdings are in relation to these communities at risk is something that we've all kind of been missing, right? We're not really ever been looking at it in this scale. You look at what this partner's doing, you look at what that partner's doing, but on a landscape scale, you're not really looking at what everybody's doing or where they're located or where you can collaborate. And there's already been successful stories that have been coming out by doing these CWPPs of where this collaboration is taking place with these agencies and other land conservancies to expand burn units and to work together to create defensible space around structures. How much time do we have left?
15 minutes.
Sweet. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead at this point and pass it to Jonathan to talk about a cooperator's perspective on updating these wildfire protection plans, and then we'll answer any questions.
So I'm not sure if I can take up 15 minutes, but I'll try.
Go ahead with your thing too if you want to, unless you want me to drive it.
So the good news, as a cooperator, the commitment is pretty minimal. They asked for shape files. You know, when I first got into this, I thought, great, what have I been volunteered for now? I didn't realize it would be coming up here, but other than that, it wasn't too bad. Shape files, you know, a few questions. There was never any hard deadlines, so, you know, if there was a request for shape files and they said, we need it this week, and that just didn't work for me, it was never any pushback. It was really easy. And there are a few meetings. If you're ever if you have the chance to participate in CWPP, you're asked to as a cooperator, go to the meetings. From a cooperator standpoint, that's the best part about it. And you know where your hazard spots are. You've already got your data, so you're not there for that. But the meetings are really what pay off as a cooperator. So it's kind of like the FLN. You know, one of the biggest strong suits of being here is all of y'all. I mean, we're here to meet people, to build relationships, so that when we get out on the fire line, or we're put in that situation, you know, whether it's somebody that you've just seen their face and you can't think of their name, and it's Kelly somebody, or it's Dean Simon and you can't forget his name, you still recognize the face, and it's somebody that, you know, hey, I've seen them. They've got experience, I can trust them, or at least there's some familiarity there. So the meetings are definitely worth it from that standpoint. Getting to put a face with, in my I guess, personal perspective, going to this meeting with Rosman, meeting the fire department chief, meeting the emergency management people, the EMS folks that are going to be out there, I have no idea who they are. But we've met, and they've been able to put a face with the Wildlife Commission, probably for the first time, at least, you know, someone who's not with a badge and a gun. So I think that's probably the best thing coming out of those meetings from my perspective, is being able to just start to develop those relationships, even if it's just on the smallest, briefest level. The other side of that is looking at these maps. I know my boundaries, and I probably know some of the issues on the state parks, but beyond that, you know, learning what's going on around me on the, is this landscape scale? That's kind of important too. And that kind of continues on to other perspectives. I've been on the fire department now for about 20 years, and we know where our bad neighborhoods are. You know, we know where we can't get the trucks, we know where the south face is, we know what's going to burn. But having you come back in and confirm it, that always feels good. Everybody likes to be told they're right. It also helps with letting us know what we've forgotten about. We knew that was a bad area, but it's not as bad as this other area, so we kind of minimized it. This kind of reminds us of what's going on there. I know my district, but being on the fire department, you've probably heard of mutual aid. I think most of us have. We go mutual aid all the time, so it means we're going to somebody else's district. I don't know where the bad areas are in your district, but I know where they are in mine. Being able to see that on the map and see what I might be getting into in the future, and then seeing, different ratings of, hey, this area is just as bad as my area is over here. Now I've got a perspective and I'm able to relate that to something. And I think that, being able to relate something to my own experience is pretty powerful. So there's that, and I've got notes because I'm getting old and I don't remember anything anymore. So yeah, that's mostly that. Good enough, right?
So I would play on that too. So I would say too that you're absolutely right about the mutual aid perspective, and from a pre-planning perspective, it's really important to understand that even if you think that you know your fire district, one of the things that I've found when I'm doing these community assessments is that I'm not doing them alone, okay? We ask the fire department to participate in these community assessments, and every time we go out the door with them, they already think that they know their district, and 9 times out of 10, I get them every single time where there's been a new development placed in, or a road's been closed, or it's been rutted out and they no longer will be able to take even a Type 6 engine up there. And so it changes their perspective halfway through the community assessment process but it usually can take up to 6 hours. The first hour, they're kind of telling stories. By the time we're done, I know everything about that fire department. I know almost every single call that's ever happened there. I know individual stories about individual homeowners. And at the end, they say, we really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this because, one, we don't necessarily have the capacity to fight a fire here like we thought we did. We may not have the resources that we have set aside to be sufficient enough to fight a fire or do any kind of prevention work in this area, and we definitely don't want to be taking an engine anywhere near this. And so they're kind of looking at, should we be changing the type of equipment that we have? Do we need to be looking at from a preparedness standpoint? Do we need to think about purchasing other equipment? Do we need to be thinking about putting in a substation? All different types of other different perspectives that come along with just doing a ride-along and actually assessing their communities.
So lastly, I'm just going to touch on the landowner perspective. When the first CWPP project took place in North Carolina, I worked with Keith Suttles and all these other guys with the North Carolina Forest Service, so I had a little different perspective then, more focused on the landowners. And for them, it's a whole different thing. They're looking at, some of these people never leave their yard. They go to work, they come home, and that's it. They may go on vacation, but they don't really see anything in their neighborhood other than the drive to their driveway. This may be the first time they've ever met their neighbors. Maybe if they've got one of those real spark plug people that runs the neighborhood, maybe they've met them and learned a little bit. If they've got an HOA, they may have learned more about that. But this may be their first time really getting to know people. Maybe. And to most of them, their boundary is their property line. They never look beyond it. Other than what stick hit their antenna on the way in. They're not going beyond that little boundary, and this is the first time that they've had a chance to actually look around and pay attention to what's going on in their neighborhood. And that's a big eye-opener for a lot of landowners. We had a fire, I don't remember, 2007, 2008, something like that, high wind fire in Chloe Cove in Swain County. First time NC Forest Service had burned houses, and we burned a lot of them. There were only 25 houses in that neighborhood, that development. When you talk to a landowner, they know that you're going to have a structural engine sitting at their house if there's ever a fire. We don't have 25 structural engines in Swain County. We don't have 25 structural engines if we call Koala next to us, Stokoa, and maybe even if we go into Macon County. That's a huge deal to the landowner. They've never considered the fact that there won't be a fire engine sitting at their house. They expect there to be 3 or 4 because they've seen all the video from the news in New York when it's a 6-alarm fire and there are fire engines everywhere. They haven't considered that. So this program does a lot to try to open their eyes, let them know, like Christina said, what they can do as a neighborhood, what they can do as a landowner, and kind of help them realize the truth of the story, which is, you're kind of on your own. There might be a little bit of help, but you better be self-sustainable. And this is the first way to finally maybe break the ice for some of them and get them to start to realize that they've got work to do. That's about all I've got, unless y'all have questions.